I know we're at the hour, but a few more questions. I'll try to be brief before we close. First, Mr. Beer, I saw your head nodding during the discussion of warrants. My understanding is the issue of warrants is specifically to federal agents going into homes without a warrant, including homes of United States citizens, the practice of racial profiling, which has been sanctioned by the Supreme Court. Do you want to briefly add anything to that?
Well, absolutely. What we're talking about is going to a judge to actually enter a home. I mean, that is, how do we know it's the immigrant's home? We don't know that unless you actually present probable cause to a judge and determine that. You don't just rely on some individual ICE agent or some federal agent's gut. We saw what happened in Minnesota when they went with their gut. They dragged a U.S. citizen out of his home in front of his grandkids in his underwear in the middle of winter. That's unbelievable what's happening.
And it wasn't who they thought it was. Mr. Linderman, quick follow-up question. I heard you say just a few minutes ago in response to Senator Cornyn's question that all background vetting processing should be slowed down so that we're sure of who's trying to come into the country, something along those lines. Did I hear that correctly?
Senator, what I meant to say was that we should not speed up issuing for some abstract reason because the paperwork is pending or someone is demanding.
So I would imagine that not speeding up should apply to South African Afrikaners that the White House has given preferential treatment to. Agree or disagree?
I would agree that everyone who comes as a foreigner to our country.
But it also apply to those seeking to come to the United States by purchasing this gold card that the president has talked about?
If they're foreign nationals, they would all be vetted, sir.
Thank you. The transition to a question from Ms. Gambler. I asked you in the first round of questions if the process for Afrikaners consideration was abiding by the standards and best practices that the GAO has laid out. Has the gold card program that the president has referenced a few times also implemented your recommendations?
Thank you, Ranking Member Padilla. We also have not looked at that proposal, so we don't have insights to share related to that process. Certainly, if that's something that your office would be interested in GAO taking a look at, that's something we'd be happy to follow up with you on.
That would be, I think, incredibly valuable for not just this committee, but the entire Senate, both sides of the aisle, for that matter. You're talking about the gold card proposal. Have you seen something in writing?
No, GAO has not specifically been reviewing that proposal.
Okay. I think that's it for questions, but I understand you have a closing statement, so do I.
I don't have a closing statement. If you have a closing statement, go ahead.
Sure, just a couple of things. I mean, we heard a lot today. I mean, I don't even know where to begin, but sadly, as I predicted in my opening statements, we heard repeated claims about immigrant communities and their supposed crimes on a mass scale. We heard what I feared, the scapegoating attacks that I warned about in my opening remarks, like I mentioned. First, just to set the record straight for folks in the audience and those watching from home of what sanctuary cities are and what sanctuary cities are not. There's no city in America that the federal government cannot go in and enforce federal law, period. A sanctuary jurisdiction, a state, a municipality is simply a choice that those local governments take to not dedicate local resources for the enforcement of federal law. That's a federal government's job. Some jurisdictions choose to. Clearly, we've heard some examples. Some do not. Sanctuary policies are not unlawful. They are not unconstitutional. Second, the question about USCIS processing pause. Happy to enter into the record the very memos that were referenced in the conversation earlier today. And speaking of
Without objection.
Thank you. And speaking of USCIS, I know Senator Kennedy's not here anymore, but Mr. Joseph Edlow is indeed the director of USCIS. It should be a name familiar to him because he was confirmed by the Senate in July 2025 after having been considered by the Senate Judiciary Committee, which he is a member of prior to that. Look, folks, what we did not hear from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle today was any serious discussion of the far more widespread fraud being committed by United States citizens, starting all the way to the top with President Trump. And we have example after example after example. Fraud that by the numbers vastly outpaces anything tied to immigrant communities. We said it before and we'll say it again in closing. Nobody condones fraud. When it happens, it should be investigated and those responsible to be held accountable, as they are currently with existing laws. But if you want to truly look beyond the so-called tip of the iceberg, then demonizing entire communities for the actions of a few is not the answer. And to that end, Mr. Chairman, I want to enter into the record statements from leading refugee resettlement and advocacy organizations detailing the harmful impacts of the indiscriminate arrests in Minnesota into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. And in closing, just two final things. A serious conversation about fraud would focus on strengthening oversight and improving enforcement, not the diversion of enforcement resources or by pushing career professionals involved in enforcement and investigation out, as the current administration is doing. We'd also be wanting to make sure that systems that we already have are working as intended. That's the conversation we should be having. But that's not what happened today. So I urge my colleagues on this committee to step away from the theatrics and the stereotypes and to engage in the real work on a bipartisan basis of identifying genuine vulnerabilities, of strengthening safeguards, and holding all bad actors accountable. Thank you.